listening to the Pro Bono Happy Hour. I'm Rena Gleaser. Welcome back. Today's guests are Cindy Anderson and John Bai of Lindquist Vennum. They're both based in Minneapolis. John is the chair of the firm's Public Service Committee, and Cindy is the Pro Bono Director. We discuss their roles, an innovative community economic development effort to provide legal services to immigrant and minority business owners, and a one-of-a-kind training program called Breaking Poverty Barriers to Equal Justice. We hope you enjoy our conversation. Cindy, John, welcome to the Pro Bono Happy Hour. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Nice to be here.
Thank you.
Well, we're really excited to speak with you. Let's jump right in. To start, could each of you introduce yourself, tell us about your background and how you got to Lindquist?
Well, I'm John Bai, and I am a litigator here at Lindquist and have been since 1985, hard for me to imagine, and have been co-chair or chair of our Public Service Committee, which oversees pro bono, for most of those years, so starting in about 1995.
And I'm Cynthia Anderson, or Cindy Anderson, and came here just 4.5 years ago, having started my legal career in migrant legal services with Southern Minnesota Regional Legal Services, one of two of the largest legal services providers in the state back in the 80s. And from there, was in the fortunate position to help start and launch an organization now called the Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota, which is where I came to be engaged with pro bono and their pro bono program on the nonprofit side, which generated a number of pro bono projects for large law firms around the state of Minnesota, and specifically the metro area. And Lindquist was certainly one of our clients, if you will, in terms of shopping out our pro bono work. And so came to know the firm well, among other firms. And when the position opened up here for pro bono director, I think the first pro bono director program to open in the metro area over many years, perhaps ever, after the initial staffing took place back a number of years ago. My predecessor was Candy Goodman, and when she decided to retire, I had the good fortune of applying and being hired here at Lindquist. So come to it with many years of nonprofit experience.
Thank you. That's a good segue, actually. We'd like to learn more about Lindquist in general, the firm and the firm's pro bono program. So could you provide a general overview?
Sure. The firm's roots go back to 1946 when the founders actually of two different law firms returned from World War II, and then some good friends from each of those two law firms were, this is literally how they describe it, as being on a beach in Florida on a winter vacation and drawing out in the sand with a stick how the merger of these two firms would work. And so the current incarnation has been around since 1968. We have roughly 150 attorneys, offices in Minneapolis, Denver, and Sioux Falls, and it's a full-service law firm. The program really, under its current version, really got started in October of 1995, and basically, I was called to a meeting of law firms with Esther Lardent, and the MSBA said they were going to give out an award to firms who signed on to the then fairly new Pro Bono Challenge. And I was served on another board with some people who were there. They invited me. I brought that back to Lindquist, and we agreed to sign on to this challenge. And as a result, 11 firms in Minneapolis got an award for doing nothing other than signing on to the challenge. But I think it was a brilliant idea to get us all to commit early on. Since we then, in the fall of 1996, so roughly a year later, hired Cindy's predecessor as essentially a full-time pro bono director, and then starting in 1997, and ever since then we've met the challenge. And partly that was due to the adoption of a policy at the same time Cindy's predecessor started, giving credit and formalizing the system. That's when the Pro Bono or Public Service Committee was put in place. And that's sort of the organizational structure. There's a committee within the firm that oversees Cindy essentially, but Cindy does all the day-to-day work.
I think John talks really about the recent origins of the formal pro bono program, and maybe he can talk later when we talk about our awards. But my understanding is that also, besides the formal program, that one of the firm's founders, Leonard Lindquist, just brought the concept and really the passion for public service from his really humble roots. And I think John can talk about that later when we talk about our award and sort of the deep meaning of that beyond the formal structure. It's really part of the firm's culture and its origins.
So thank you for that, Cindy. You talked a little bit about your roles, with John being the chair of the Public Service Committee and Cindy being the director of Pro Bono. Could you talk a little bit about your roles and responsibilities, how you divide up what you do, how you spend your time in service of the firm's Pro Bono program?
Well, I'll start off. Really, Cindy does all of the day-to-day work of the program, and I am just oversight of the committee which oversees her. And we, I would say, act sort of as a board of directors of the Pro Bono program, providing direction and sort of some policy guidance, and get involved in some of the big decisions. But the day-to-day is all handled by Cindy. So my role, I know some firms have, sort of pro bono lawyers who also serve an extensive amount of their time providing pro bono service. And I, like every other lawyer in the firm, does do pro bono, but it's not a overwhelming part of my practice. I'm a full-time lawyer, and this is just a committee that I serve on for purposes of firm administration. So we look at what's coming in for pro bono. The committee has oversight over approval of pro bono projects, but Cindy approves probably 95% of those on her own, and then only comes to me with maybe some questionable ones. And then if we still have questions, then we sort of bump that to the committee. But I'd say that's sort of the overall structure.
Or to us, or maybe you check with us sometimes.
Right. Yeah, and I can talk a little bit about sort of what a job description really looks like, and I would add to John's description of my position that the firm's also dedicated resources to provide an assistant to the pro bono program. So it isn't just me, as John, I'd love to take credit for, but I do have help in the form of an assistant who does a lot of work with scheduling and support and organizing around things that need to happen in my role. And so that's some extra resources that really makes things run smoothly. But as John mentioned, I spend my days and time really implementing, I guess, what I kind of consider sort of a nonprofit within a for-profit. And so the program internally is really structured a lot like a nonprofit in terms of having a budget and being accountable to that budget and deciding how to spend the money under that budget, both in terms of contributions outside the firm, but also in terms of what we do internally to support the work that goes on here. Along the same lines, we draft and create and make suggestions for policies about how to handle structure within the firm. How do our procedures work to make sure that pro bono cases are aligned with certainly all the governance authority in the rules of ethics, and meet our clients' needs as effectively as any other kind of client that we serve here. So kind of running an organization within an organization. And then beyond those things, there's the daily work of making sure that when we take on a new pro bono project, that our attorneys have the resources and the support and training that's necessary, and that those things are accessible and made available really in simple formats so that they don't waste time. Certainly in recruiting recruiting the right attorneys here and the right groups and the right partnerships outside the firm to make sure that projects are successful and can be carried out effectively with the resources we have. And there's always the minutia of case placement, things that are crossing your desk at any given moment, and certainly troubleshooting when the phone rings and someone's found you on the internet with a crisis and just tries to come in sort of a back door and get service and plead their case with someone who might listen. And I would add also that a significant role in the position, and I think this is true of all of our pro bono leadership in Minnesota, and that is being really engaged outside the firm with the broader community and the largest version of the legal community, really, on kind of access to justice, the delivery of services, the funding, in different committees in terms of how volunteer network programs work, strategies, big picture involvement, sort of ranging from sort of the nuts and bolts of delivery out into the broader picture of really, what our legislature is doing and what they know about our clients in poverty and their access to the legal system and solutions to their problems. So it's really a broad range from, quite small, detailed minutia of dotting I's and crossing T's out to really the big picture vision in the state and country, for that matter, or even globally, about what's going on with human rights work and how to provide access.
Is there anything that you wish you could do if you had more time? Just never seems to climb your to-do list?
I think that's the $10 million question. There's always more things to do, and I really think one of the things that attracts people to this position, at least as they're structured, and this is inclusive of other firms in Minnesota, the way the programs are structured is really with a lot of liberty to, dream up projects and really shoot for the moon. And so I can't think of any one particular thing, but, given more time, I think just addressing the unmet need and the challenge of trying to look at systemic change and holistic projects and approaches to dealing with systems in addition to putting out sort of the everyday fires that go on. I think it would just be more of the same, really, and I appreciate this firm and certainly the state and actually PBI's vision towards a more holistic approach to change.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, sometimes we get so caught up in the weeds that we don't take the time to see the big picture, and we have to think big and think systemic. So one of the things you mentioned I wanted to drill down on a little bit, and that is your community. You live in a wonderful city in a wonderful state, and we're hoping you could describe the pro bono culture in Minneapolis writ large. Is Minnesota nice a real phenomenon? How would you describe your community?
I think it is. On the other hand, it's also competitive in the sense that I think we have a very friendly but competitive pro bono environment. So in part, as I mentioned, how we and the other firms in town originally got into this all at the same time together as far as the pro bono challenge. And we've always enjoyed trying to outdo each other, and but it's a friendly competition. And for example, I think of for the what on national terms have been relatively smaller firms based here in Minnesota. We were for that size. I think the Minnesota firms were the first to go with non-lawyer directors. Sort of full-time directors of their pro bono programs, and I think that was unusual. I think it's still somewhat unusual for firms, sort of the mid-size firms, to devote those sorts of resources. But ever since we've had pro bono directors, they all regularly meet to discuss what efforts can be done together. And again, I think those are there's a friendly rivalry that goes along as part of that as we try to outdo each other in doing good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with John. I mean, I think, the comments on Minnesota nice can be sort of taken both ways, as either a real true sentiment or sort of a passive-aggressive Minnesota nice. So I was going to ask you to clarify your meaning there. But I think John's right about the friendly competition, but, underlying that, and this certainly is true when the pro bono directors here meet on a monthly basis, and that is that people share, best practices, they share challenges, they share frustrations, they look toward towards collective solution and innovative approaches to things. They really want to know what the others are doing, not so that they can outdo them, but rather so that they can add value or connect the dots better. And I think, people beyond the legal sector are really looking to be connected. We have great connections not only with our peers as a law firm and as pro bono directors and public service committees, but I think beyond that, people are very well connected to board leadership in the nonprofit sector. They're connected to the social service work that goes on in support of the same clients we see in the legal system. They are connected very well to the funding community and therefore are able to convene at the table the right players. And I think, PBI certainly knows that and is experimenting with that very idea in the collaborative justice project here. And that I think is going to bear itself out really well. When you bring the right players to the table, you can look at both those sort of elements of daily life and the minutia that it takes, but at the same time really look at systemic change so that we all do our jobs better and more effectively without redundancy, and really look at making change happen for the better. So.
Yeah, it's really a wonderful community model there that's to be emulated around the country, around the world. So in preparing for our conversation today, and this may surprise many of our listeners, but we actually do prepare and get ready for our chats. You have a wonderful description of the Leonard E. Lindquist Pro Bono Award on your website, where you write, quote, "We know the legal profession enjoys a unique role in the community and that we have the skills and ability to provide services for the disadvantaged and to promote the public interest in ways that no other profession can." So could you tell us a little bit about how you use firm awards to motivate and honor pro bono participation at the firm?
Well, Leonard was one of the founding partners, and I would say fathers. I mean, he really was looked up to great respect within the firm and within Minnesota. And he grew up in the Depression. He would often talk about during those days when his family did not have enough money when he was, I think it was like 13 years old, to feed him, that he left home during the Depression and rode the rails through northern Minnesota and out west to try and find itinerant work to do. And he described on several occasions what he probably politically incorrectly, I'm not sure what the term would be, but described hobos by campfires, literally, giving them the jackets off their backs, and in at least one instance, saving his life in a brawl. And he just said he always felt that, given the great fortune that had come to his life since then, that we all had a duty to give back to the communities, and that we are all a product of our communities. And so that is a spirit which we all heard of here, and usually at our holiday party he would remind us of that obligation. And so the award is in his name, and although he's been gone from us now, it's probably 10 years, I think even those who are new to the firm since then still realize that his spirit runs deep within the firm, and not only the pro bono program, but through other activities that people engage in here.
So, Rena, that award is given out at an annual event that we've hosted each year here to recognize one outstanding pro bono attorney in particular, or group of attorneys or paralegals for that matter, that worked on something significant or dedicated significant time and resources. And that award is taken really seriously. The committee really deliberates over that. They look at hours, they look at involvement, they look at the depth, they look at the nurturing that went on in the case. And so there's a variety of award winners that are listed there on the website for different kinds of things. Some of them higher profile, some of them more day-to-day, some of them in simple service, or always their willingness to be available. So that's one of the recognitions that we do, and that's done at a large firm luncheon, and lots of stories told about the pro bono work, a lot of sort of glory and fame around that particular award. But also at that event, the other recognition that we do is for all attorneys and paralegals whose goal is to achieve at 50 hours or more of pro bono, in the year, and those folks are all recognized publicly at that event in addition to the one special award winner. Each of them is given a special thank you and letter card from management and the managing partner that recognizes their 50 hours, but also in conjunction with both the LEL main award and also with the award winners, a specific dollar amount is given to each of those recipients to donate to the nonprofit legal services provider one of the ones that they choose that we participate with. And that is a shift away from sort of giving people token items. We give an award, a physical award, but the newer generation is really interested in giving back and has told us in no small way that they would rather be giving $50 or $100 to a nonprofit than receiving a sort of another coffee mug. And so we've made that change to try to be multi-generational in our approach to award giving. We do have an intranet internal to the office. We do a lot of posting of pro bono successes there and certainly externally on our website when that's appropriate with regards to confidentiality. And then in the last year, really took seriously also more of this intergenerational approach and knowledge that younger folks really need more immediate reward and sort of motivation towards the work that they do. And so I've been using more spontaneous intermittent gifts, some small chocolates or, little rewards, if you will, that people get on their desk as a surprise because they did something fantastic or stepped in at the last minute or helped someone else, accomplish their goals. So we're really trying to be kind of cross-generational and yet preserve the historic nature of our other rewards.
Those are tremendous ideas, and I love the marriage of not being so rigid and being able to be flexible and adaptive, but also love the origin story and honoring your roots and your culture. And I would imagine that just about every person who has passed through the firm knows that story about Leonard Lindquist.
I think you're right.
And that is now the glue that binds your people together. And I love that. I think it speaks to a lot of values going on in the profession. So that's tremendous. Switching gears a little bit, could you tell us about a relatively new initiative of yours called the Austin Area Minority Business Project? And I'll say for listeners unfamiliar with the local Minnesota geography, this threw me for a loop because I couldn't understand why you had an Austin, Texas pro bono centered project, but this is Austin, Minnesota. So we've all learned something.
Right. Austin, Minnesota is probably more famous for the Spam Museum because that is where the Hormel plant is located. And so we are all very familiar with Austin, Minnesota, and the Austin Area Minority Business Project grows out of a really unique partnership and really long-term involvement with a number of organizations and in many ways harkens back to my roots and ideas that percolate over time and come to fruition into this project now. But Austin is about an hour and a half from here, and I think the firm here has been talking about, as nationally folks have been talking about, how to really leverage legal access points and pro bono services that are so readily available, albeit always scarce, but readily available in metro areas and getting them into greater Minnesota. And we've been having conversations about that. And so this ties in sort of with the goal of doing that. How can we get our services out of the metro and into other areas that need them? But also with the concept that small communities outside of metro areas, and I hesitate to call them rural because they're not necessarily entirely rural. They're developing communities in their own ways. But how do we grow those communities as they change? And I think this is true across the country that small communities are either dying or they're being changed by immigrant populations, as they have throughout our time in history in the United States, by newer immigrant communities. And so because of my background with both migrant farm workers in greater Minnesota and new and arriving immigrants, have had the opportunity to see small communities around the states where both business development and the absorption of new immigrant communities is done really effectively, and places where it is done really poorly. And the difference of the outcomes and the racism and hostility and actually the success of business communities really depend on how things are implemented when new arrivals come to communities. So this collaborative comes from sort of the anecdotal evidence that, when communities get together and they plan for and support the needs of new immigrant communities, our small towns across the country really can thrive and do better and create new industries and jobs, for that matter, and an economic infrastructure that is dying in many small communities. So this project comes together with the pro bono services of Lindquist Vennum, an organization that I referenced earlier called the Immigrant Law Center of Minnesota that does immigration-related law, and a nonprofit, non-legal entity called the Latino Economic Development Center that fosters economic opportunities, loans, training, and development for Latino business owners, and also a research organization that we added to the equation so that they could be following in a long-term study the outcomes of our project in the Austin area, so that we can actually prove to the world that by doing things strategically and doing things with the appropriate levels of support, that the deep community outcomes show positive growth. So we're not just tracking how many new businesses open, although that'll certainly be a factor, but we're looking longer and deeper, and we're looking at community engagement in the schools. We're looking at success of first and second generation immigrants as their parents integrate into communities. Are the grades better? Do parents participate in school conferences? Are we raising the voting population? Are we engaging people in city meetings or in city council? Are people, getting engaged in their local political systems, and other measurements? So we're really excited about launching this project. As you know, and anyone listening will know, is we can offer pro bono services, but our nonprofit partners need funding in order to, grow programming. And so we were really excited when the Bank of America settlement money went out for community development and proposed this project, which was able then to fund 3 of our partner organizations to do the work with us. So we will be the pro bono provider of services, not all, but some services coming out of this project. And so we will be on standby for case referrals in a couple of areas of immigration law as it relates to probably naturalization, perhaps DACA and renewal or DACA original applications. And then also excitingly for our corporate attorneys, through the Latino Economic Development Center, we're really anticipating a plethora of legal advice requests around the area of business formation, of business partnerships, perhaps real estate issues in the form of contracts for deeds or reviewing contract agreements, and then also in the area of employment law. So we have attorneys ready to stand by. We have some room for growth into the corporate sector involvement for pro bono if the needs and demands outweigh what we can provide at Lindquist. And so we're really, really excited about launching this and have not yet really had enough work coming through the project to be able to gauge these outcomes, but are looking forward to hopefully continuing this into the next few years and seeing it replicated as a model both in Minnesota and outside the state if we can sort of put together the manual on best practices around this.
Well, that'll be fascinating, and we'll have to have you back so you can report and let us know how it's going. I wanted to just let people know who weren't familiar with the acronym DACA. So that's Deferred Action for Child Arrivals. So this was sort of an immigration-related term that you can look up if you want to learn more and are unfamiliar with it. I want to pivot, Cindy, and ask you about another one of your hallmark initiatives. It's called Breaking Poverty Barriers to Equal Justice. And this was a really pioneering, first of its kind endeavor. And I was hoping you could tell us what it is, when and how you created it, and its current status and how it's evolved.
I love to talk about breaking poverty barriers, both as a project and as a concept. And I am so excited about this project and to see it really still living on after many years of work. And the idea is that it would live on and continue to be a tool for others to use around the country. So rolling back the clock, this project predates my arrival here as a concept, and I began working with one of my colleagues at Volunteer Lawyers Network when I wore the hat of pro bono director sector on the nonprofit side. And we could see that lots and lots of resources go into the provision of pro bono services. But we could also see that sometimes those relationships fail. A lot of resources go into preparing a case for transfer to pro bono, for interviewing clients, for setting up and teeing up training and pro bono activities from the nonprofit sector to the private sector, but that sometimes once cases got placed, there was an opportunity for those cases to fall through the cracks or fail. And oftentimes what we would learn in looping back with our clients and our pro bonos that there was very much a disconnect because of communication barriers or misunderstandings. And what we realized is that even though there were cultural differences that we hear a lot about in current diversity activities, so we're looking at language, we're looking at interpreters, we're looking at race, what we weren't looking at is the simple factor that there's socioeconomic differences between communication. And so one of the ideas was that we could try to improve that by learning more about those different socioeconomic cultures, by both helping our attorneys in the private sector understand what it was like coming from poverty and what some of the traits of people in poverty have in terms of communication and lifestyle, and vice versa, that we could help teach clients how to better and more effectively work with their pro bono attorneys and therefore better leverage resources. One of the other concerns really in the beginning was that we were perhaps perpetuating stereotypes about both communities to the other. So this project was launched after I came to Lindquist, when I approached the firm and sort of pitched this as a project and had some support from the judiciary and other people outside the firm who sort of thought that they understood the concept. And when I pitched it at the firm, I was pitching it as something that perhaps they might want to fund partially or leverage some funding from someone else to participate with. And much to my surprise and delight, they said, well, let's just do it. It sounds really great. And so the firm, through a number of different committees in its foundation, really supported this project wholesale. So what we did was bring in a nationally known trainer whose name is Donna Beagle from Communication Across Barriers in Portland. And we hosted a Pro Bono Week 2014 live event, and she did her magic on teaching and training a large segment of the private and public legal sector about clients in poverty, their communication styles, their perspectives on the world from different types of poverty, really breaking it down into sort of a sociology class, really, and teaching about perspective. And so we taped that training and edited that live material into videotaped segments that we've posted now publicly and has been transformed to a large extent over the years, and just recently was launched in a YouTube format that's available nationwide for anyone to use, that runs a pro bono program either from the private sector in the pro bono sense or from the public sector and wants to train their staff or employees. And we have had interest in this program, I kid you not, from across the country, Alaska to Hawaii, when we were taking registrations for it, from across the legal sector as well. The judiciary is very interested in training the bench on the kinds of issues that people in poverty face and their different communication styles, to the law schools who have run the curriculum. Court staff is interested in it, really, the access to justice movements. Since we put it out in the formats online, we also had United Health Group here in Minnesota interested in changing that format and asked us if we would be willing, in conjunction with VLN, to consider changing it into a WebEx format. And so they did that with their employees for the first time last summer. Wildly well received. They told us that we had raised the bar on content for their live web or their WebEx format. Very interactive in that way, and very innovative use. And then are now doing that again with the help of United Health Group, Volunteer Lawyers Network, also the ABA Center for Pro Bono, and the National Association for Pro Bono Professionals, are supporting another round of WebEx formats here coming up in October, and I'm certainly happy to get you that information. And then for anyone interested, they can always access different formats and segments of the project on our website at Lindquist.com. So we're really excited that it's still alive and out there and being used. We've now got it laid out, I think, in 5 different formats for users to choose which version they would like to use for their training. Very exciting.
Yeah, so for people who want to learn more, go to the Lindquist website. There's a lot of information there. You can go to our website. We've got some good information on our blog about this project. I think Cindy was great and did a Q&A with us. You can also really easily type into any search engine, breaking poverty barriers to equal justice, and boom, all the great links and information will come up and you can learn more. So it's a terrific project, a terrific effort, and I think it's really of the moment. I think there's a great awareness that this is something that we and the community really need and really could use. Could each of you share one or more, if you want, meaningful pro bono stories, a success or a project or a case that was meaningful to you, either that you worked on personally or that the firm worked on that just sort of has resonated with you?
Oh, that's such a big question, Rena. John, do you have anything that jumps to mind over your years that really stands out?
You know, one thing about our pro bono program here in general is that it tends to be a lot of individual stories as opposed to sort of major headline type stories. So these aren't, our successes are not ones you'd read about in the paper. I would say for me, it's I routinely serve over at our housing court, and through the Volunteer Lawyers Network, many of the firms in town staff that. So when, for example, when people get eviction notices, we have coordinated with the courts that the notice goes out with the eviction notice, or the summons and complaint to get them evicted, telling them that there is this help available at the courthouse on the day of their hearing or any other day they want to come in. And so I help staff that, and so on Friday afternoons usually, and I never know what's going to be coming in the door. Whether it's someone who wants an expungement of a prior eviction proceeding so that they can rent more easily, or whether it's someone who in 10 minutes is going to be in the courtroom for having failed to pay rent and needs advice as to what defenses they might have. I can think of, one that comes to mind was probably 3 months ago. A family came in. They were being evicted, and they felt it had been because they had complained about bed bugs in their apartment and what they could do about that. And so it was advising them not only what the defenses would be, but what affirmative claims they did have as a result of their possessions being inhabited by bedbugs, which, as it turned out, had come from the neighboring apartment. So that was certainly one where I felt I greatly contributed to their well-being, because they were very concerned about being thrown out on the street, plus really without any of their belongings, because they were all infested with bed bugs.
Yeah, I think, Rena, John is really right. I mean, one of the hallmarks here has been that I think this firm in particular, and this is something that really attracts me to it and keeps me engaged, is really been focused on the fact that everyday people are just as important as big case headlines. And so the firm's programs have stayed really dedicated to sort of the things we see on the street, the things that people on a daily basis really need, and the things that the legal services community tells us are important to their legal community. And that's not to say that we love taking big litigation. We're happy to work on, appeals cases, and we'll take a case all the way up the chain if we need to. But our daily work is really about serving clients in need. And so, it's easier for me to talk about projects or communities and groups that have benefited from our services than it is to really single out any specific case. But three things really come to mind that I think are examples of the programming and that really kind of bring tears to my eyes when I think about them. And one of those in a big way is the patent project that I think PBI and others across the country have heard about over the years. And I say that the importance around that is just so exciting to me because it has had national impact and it's allowed others to leverage work that we've done here. And I think that's really incredibly exciting. The other thing I think that has been exciting for me to see is, and I say this because it's exciting to see the impact that real stories have on pro bono attorneys, and that's been around our work in the area of expungement. I think this is an incredibly misunderstood area of not so much the law, but of the communities that are in need of criminal expungement. And that is to say that I think we approach this work in particular thinking that people who need expungements are bad people. They're criminals. They have committed crimes, and they're sort of the underbelly of the community that we might want to work with. They're not going to get us headline stories, and they sort of aligns itself with criminal defense. But when you bring people to this work who can actually sit down with someone in need of an expungement, it is cathartic to see what happens to especially a young attorney. And we've used expungement as one of our summer associate programs for a few years. But to change that perspective, and there's a project that you can also look up online called We Are All Criminals that has an interesting perspective on this, with the idea I'm getting at. And that is that one story that really stands out to me is one of our summer associates who came to me after being signed up or paired up with a criminal expungement client. And she came to my office afterward and she said, "Oh my God, a 46-year-old engineer was just crying in my office. And he was crying because he had a criminal expungement need, and all he wanted to do was pay his child support." And she just had really had a moment that moved her needle on this issue way into a different range. And so that was really exciting to me. And the other thing I would say about casework that really triggers something for me every single day, and this is testament, I think, not just to Lindquist, but the Minnesota community, and that's been the ability to be really nimble in our responses. The issues of human trafficking, and now over the last few years, the child arrivals from Central America have been whole segments of populations that we've been able to very quickly and adeptly make partnerships and training materials and pro bono projects out of, and really be able to have an impact on the changing needs. And so those have, clearly each one of those cases, working with victims in both of those arenas has been just really something, to feel proud of.
Well, thank you both for sharing. So let's end with this. Other than Leonard Lindquist, who's your pro bono or access to justice role model?
Well, I'm going to give John a second to think about that because I know that one of his deepest mentors really is Leonard Lindquist, and maybe he can think of someone else in addition. But I don't mean to be promoting of PBI, but I'm certainly happy to give you the credit for it. But my first exposure to Judge Lippman was at a PBI conference a couple of years ago, and I can still hear that man's voice resonating in my head, and still motivates me. And in fact, I asked PBI for the tape of the session that he spoke at to use really one phrase that still resonates with me, and that was, I'll never do it justice, of course, but something along the lines of, if we cannot provide equal access to justice, we might as well close the courtroom doors. And we took that at one of our annual pro bono awards, and we opened the session with that comment. And I think everybody just, those simple few words and his passion for equal access really just still resonates with me. And so I would say Jonathan Lippman.
That's great. So this is Jonathan Lippman. He is the immediate past Chief Justice of the New York Court of Appeal, the highest court in New York. His term has ended, but yeah, he is still a true champion for justice. That is for sure.
And I'm going to give you two since you took away my one.
Yeah, perfect. Perfect.
So one would be Cindy's predecessor, Candy Goodman,
Yes.
who was the first executive director of Volunteer Lawyers Network. And for those not in Minnesota, that's the organization here in Minneapolis that matches up pro bono people with the need for pro bono services and lawyers. And it was, I think there's a debate as to whether we're the first, second, or third organization set up in the country really to do that. And then, as I said, came here to Lindquist shortly after that. And really just is everyone in town, and I suspect from years of being at PBI, people who were involved over the years certainly know of Candy, who is just incredible energy and heart in providing pro bono. And the second person I would mention is Tom Tinkham over at the Dorsey firm in Minneapolis, who is, I believe, now more or less fully retired from the practice, but has taken on just gathering a group of people together who he knows provide some part of the pro bono experience, and just gets us in a room once a month and challenges us to figure out ways to increase pro bono representation with a focus on Hennepin County, the county for Minneapolis. And it really has been just a force of his personality to get people there and to say, this month we're going to focus on getting more representation in housing court, for example, which I mentioned, or more representation in the family law area, or more representation with respect to guardians and guardian ad litem. And just, again, on a total voluntary basis, he could be certainly sitting on his laurels somewhere, and yet not only organizing it, but then routinely taking on cases himself. So I think that's a model that I think, and that I hope, and I know this has been a subject at PBI and elsewhere of as lawyers transition out of the practice to not, transition out of providing legal services to those who need it.
Yes, we call that project Second Act, so thank you for the commercial. That was a great plug, and those were 3 wonderful and inspiring choices. Thank you for sharing them with us. And John and Cindy, thank you so much for talking with me today. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
That was great, Rena. Thank you.
An enthusiastic thank you to Cindy and John for joining us today. To learn more about us and our work, visit our website at probonoinst.org. New and archived episodes of the podcast can be found on iTunes and YouTube. We'd love to hear from you. Send your comments, feedback, and suggestions to probono@probonoinst.org. Be warned, we might just read them on the air. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Pro Bono Happy Hour.